Good morning. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get rolling in about a minute. We'll just make sure that everyone has the time to join us, and then I'll get started. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Very glad to be here with all of you from coast to coast to coast. Thank you for joining us here um, for our second national forum, Designing Climate-Ready Education for the Next Generation of Professionals. So glad to have you. You may know that this forum is part of the Accelerating Climate Education for the Next Generation of Professionals, or ACE project, which is supported by Natural Resources Canada's Climate Adaptation Program. My name is Dr. Sarah Burch. I'm a professor here at the University of Waterloo. I'm also the executive director of the Waterloo Climate Institute. And one of the many, many lead authors of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Currently, I'm working on our special report on climate change in cities, but I've been involved in this work for a long time. Um, very thrilled to be here as host and moderator for our opening session of our forum today. I'd like to begin, if all is moving smoothly. Here we go. We're calling in from all over. I recognize that we have a diverse group of panelists and attendees today, but I myself am calling in from the University of Waterloo campus, and it's important to take a moment to start a conversation, to acknowledge that this work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. This main campus here, where I have my cozy little office, is situated on what is called the Haldeman Tract, which is land granted to the Six Nations. And that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. There's a lot of really important, necessary work that's been unfolding with great leadership from Myeengun Henry, Elder Henry, who's going to speak next, and so many others across this campus and this community to help us understand, particularly how, I think there's no better time than when we're talking about climate change and adaptation to think about how our scholarship, our community partnerships, our work in our communities intersect with a resilient, inclusive community. So that's really important work that's happening here across Waterloo region, across this part of the country, and I'm sure in your communities as well. So I'm very grateful for the wisdom, the leadership that's being shown, as it always has been, by the Indigenous folks across this campus and my community here. So the Waterloo Climate Institute is very happy to be hosting this event with all of us here today. Our goal is to bring together an incredible range of experts, of researchers, instructors, program specialists, representatives from professional associations from all across Canada to convene this conversation today. The Climate Institute, if you're not familiar with us, has been around actually since 2008. We play an important role here at the university as the focal point for climate change research at the University of Waterloo. Our goal is to reach across all 6 faculties rather than sort of nesting within one discipline. We recognize how important it is to share what we know, to work together across disciplines, to bring together engineers with historians, with ecologists, with biologists to understand what is unfolding in our changing climate and what we can do about it. So those partnerships, both across campus and with incredible partners off campus, have been so important to our work. Our key focus areas connect to research, of course, so we convene, we amplify, we elevate interdisciplinary research that addresses any aspect of climate change. We pay a lot of attention to knowledge mobilization, so we engage quite deeply with community partners, civil society organizations, government at all levels, the media, to not just share what our scientists are discovering as they discover it, but to actually engage in shaping that research from the outset so that it meets community needs. And very relevant to our time here this morning, we have a strong focus on training and capacity building, which I'll say a little bit more about because it's quite relevant. So this is a focus that we've really been pouring a lot of energy and heart into over the last few years. And I'd like to highlight a couple of our initiatives. So first off, we've been doing a lot of work in educating, integrating rather, climate change adaptation expertise, particularly into professional degree programs. So it was a call out in the National Adaptation Strategy that was produced just a couple of years ago by the federal government and partners at the provincial, municipal, territorial and other sectors, that we were lacking crucial skills and capacities, particularly in disciplines like engineering, architecture, planning, landscape architecture, and accounting. And so we've been working across those departments here at the University of Waterloo to understand what competencies are needed for our students to walk away with to be excellent practitioners in the climate space. And to also do that curriculum building and refinement to equip them the best we can. And we've also been focusing on providing lifelong learning opportunities. Really great examples that are unfolding right now is our Municipal Climate Change Adaptation Certificate. So this is targeting folks who work in or adjacent to municipalities all across the country, and helping them sort of build their fundamentals, their basic understanding of climate change impacts and adaptation, but then also deepen their understanding in how that connects to planning and finance and infrastructure and nature-based solutions and all sorts of areas. So that's unfolding right now and will be happening all year long, including several other lifelong learning initiatives that the Climate Institute has been hosting. So why are we all here together? These are our objectives for the forum over the next 4 days. Some of you may have participated in our first forum a year ago. This one looks quite different. I'll throw up the agenda in a second, but it's sort of sprinkled all over this week in a virtual format as it was last time. But our goals are to dig deeper into these climate action competencies that are needed in the professional disciplines and others, to hear directly from you, from colleagues in post-secondary institutions about the work that you're doing to integrate climate change into your courses, to just share your expertise and your insights, and to deepen this professional network so that we can all continue working together and benefiting from such diverse expertise. So these are our objectives today. This is the agenda. Here we are on Monday, February 2nd, starting with our open plenary over the next hour and a half or so. We have another session on climate pedagogy this afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. And then over Tuesday and Wednesday, we have our kind of more disciplinary focused sessions rather. The first on landscape architecture, then planning and accounting on Tuesday and Wednesday. Wrapping up with engineering on Thursday and a final plenary on the final day. So that is our forum, nice breaks in between and sort of manageable sections. So we invite you to pop into any and all that interest you as we go along. I should note a few housekeeping items before we move on to our first honored speaker. All of the sessions throughout this week are accessed through the Zoom conference platform. As you know, if you're here, you've made it that far, and you can use the lobby to find the sessions that you want to join. This is a bilingual event, so you can use the interpretation function at the bottom of the Zoom screen to listen to French, and you can also use closed captioning as an option there as well. And we really look forward to you discussing with each other, connecting with each other. This is in webinar format, but the other sessions are slightly different and allowing a lot more interaction and engagement. But I do encourage you to use the Q&A function throughout our speakers today at this plenary forum. We will have an opportunity for a question and answer and discussion at the end of our presentations today. So please do use that as we go. I have some questions of my own for them, but I'd really rather draw upon all of your questions when we go along here. Okay, so without further ado, I'd love to welcome our first speaker of the morning, Dr. Elder Myeengun Henry. As Indigenous Knowledge Keeper, Elder Henry provides strategic leadership to the Faculty of Health, but all across campus, really, in our response to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. He collaborates with the Office of Indigenous Relations and with the Faculty of Health community, and identifies and contributes to building reciprocal and respectful relationships with Indigenous individuals and communities. We at the Climate Institute have been thrilled to collaborate with Myeengun on several occasions, and I'm so glad that he's here to offer some reflections to kick off our morning. So thank you for joining us, Elder Henry, and I'll pass it over to you.
Happy to join you today. I'd like to open up by saying, Ani Bujo, Sego, Danse, Segoli. These are words that came from our ancestors who helped us greet each other when we meet each other in a good way. The way that we find our role here on this earth has a very prominent history in allowing ourselves to know these stories. I was thinking about it last night as I was looking up at this very beautiful moon. If you ever got a chance to see the moon last night, it was so tremendously full. It carried so many stories, and it was strong for us to understand that history and how it came to be. Our ancestors, who walked this earth before our time, left a very secure message to all people that are presently alive on this earth, that there is a role for us, a very important role that we should kind of adhere to in a very strong way. It's a matter of being connected to all living things on this earth. When I think about the role that we have as the human beings, we are in a particular situation where we know that we are reliant on all the plants and animals that exist on this earth. And I was looking at the moon last night, and I was thinking about all the full moon ceremonies that were taking place over the evening. A lot of the female people on this earth carried some of those teachings, and our young ladies got a chance to know some of those teachings at those fires that were held last night. And when I think about that moon, who we call our grandmother, who shines so brilliantly and has a great impact on the waters that we live on here in this earth. And thinking about sitting with my grandfather a number of years ago, we got a chance to share some knowledge that he learned from his grandparents, and how you sit together with your elders and enjoy some tea and sit together and talk about some of the important things that they want to pass on from generation to generation. Then I find myself at the grandfather stage of my life. And over the weekend, I got a chance to sit with my grandson. We went up to the CN Tower in Toronto, and we got a chance to overlook at this beautiful, beautiful, incredible land from that distance. And we had some stories to talk about on the way home. We had some things to share about the land, the environment, how people play a huge role in the support of keeping our Mother Earth healthy as possible. And when you're sitting with a 13-year-old boy, his mind is on various things. But when you engage in young people today, even from younger ages, you get a chance to share those teachings that we had always learned from that beautiful ancestry that we come from. And we started talking clearly about different nations that live on this earth, and how important it is for us all to share the responsibilities of keeping our land healthy. And it's so prominent in every culture around the world that the earth that we live on, she's been given a very important role to help survive all those that live on top of her, where I know our creator had given her that female spirit. And the female spirit does all those things that a mother would do to a child. It would help that child have food, sustenance, and strength and love, and to have that ability to know that we, as the ones who walk on Mother Earth every day, have to give full respect and honor to that mother that feeds us every single day. And as my grandson was riding with me, I noticed he took his earplugs out because I think he started catching on to the message that we we need to understand. And I really felt like I've reached my grandson in a way where we set those values within him to think about his actions while he's on this earth and to carry forward with the respect of the teachings that we've always had. We ventured to my First Nation, which is near London, Ontario, where he resides, and we got a call, and a family was having difficulties in one of the houses that they lived in. They were feeling that there was a presence in that house. And this was a perfect example of passing knowledge to my grandson because we went to the house and we did a house cleaning, which was we smudged the house, we did prayers, and we did songs in that house. And I watched in my grandson for the first time. He's been with me on other ones, but this time it kind of hit him a little bit different. I think he felt that this is something he knows that he would like to participate in for maybe the remainder of his life. And when you see that in his eye, it sent a love that I never felt as strong before because I think, when we get a chance to learn about ourselves and our responsibilities, it sets a tone for all of us to be able to be strong, to witness the growth of our future generations to come, and to know that we can do things in a responsible way. And what we're thinking about today is the earth that we live on and our responsibilities to the to the water, to the air, to the trees, to the plants, and how it's turning into a very difficult situation due to the climate issues that we're facing. And it wasn't different from how our ancestors knew that something would take place in this world. And I started reaching back to one of our prophecies that we share knowledge through um, these types of things called wampum belts. And one of the wampum belts that is pretty old, very old, is the seven fires prophecy, which talks about the seven stages of life on this earth. But we found out that there was another stage, another fire. Each one of these are called a fire. And the era of the eighth fire talks about a time when we as human beings have to walk in a certain direction, whether that direction takes us in a full technical world where we start forgetting about our relationship to the earth. And at that point, we have to make a very important decision. Should we continue on with that journey of high technical world or the one that connects us to the earth that we live on? And our elders would always say, we need to take that natural path because we'll get confused if we stay in the technical world and forget about our relationship to the land. So all indigenous people around the world are trying to let people know that that technical world is important. We can connect to it, but we can't stay on that road without having our relationship to the earth being entwined within us. And I think about that eighth fire and how important it is for us today, especially to build that relationship with each other, with the earth that we live on, and the mother that feeds us. So, in closing today's opening, I just like to say in a few words in my language that welcomes you all to think about the importance of our decisions that we make and how important it is for us to share the responsibilities. And we would say it in my language as Bujo Myeengun and Dejnikas Deshkan Zibian Donjiba, Myingadodem, Chimigwech, Kajamnado, Manda Ganaju and Gizgat Nongum. Ichimanado, Chimigwech Minwa, Manda Mashkiki Osama Wingush, Mashkodewish Minwa Gijik. So it's just honoring the medicines, the land, your heart, our Mother Earth, and the beautiful day and discussion that we'll have today. With that said, I give thanks to my grandfathers for the teaching. I give love and honor to my grandson for spending some time with me, and that beautiful moon that reminded me that this is in the time of the bear. The little cubs are being born now, and in the spring, they'll be coming out and welcoming themselves to beautiful Mother Earth, and life goes on. But we can do it better and stronger, and we must. With that said, miigwech everybody. It's an honor to meet with you, and I know today's discussion will be tremendous. So with that, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elder Henry. I really appreciate that. As a mother of a almost 12-year-old and almost 8-year-old, I can really appreciate those moments where, discussions take on a new depth. They bring sort of new insight as kids grow and absorb and become more open. And I also really appreciate how you framed the sort of like pretty heavy moment of choice that we find ourselves in. There are multiple pathways open to us, and they carry uh, real differences and real consequences. And so there's, a lot of wisdom there in remembering, as well as, not just exclusively focusing on innovating and inventing, but pouring energy into a great remembering of things that are so essential to how we move forward. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, so we are moving along in our schedule. Next up, I will pass the screen over to Michèle Martin from the Waterloo Climate Institute. Michèle has really been the sort of like force and energy behind this ACE project. So it's so appropriate that she's here to share some of that work with you. Michèle is the training program specialist here at the Waterloo Climate Institute. She does many, many things, but perhaps most relevant among them for our time here today is that she supports university-wide climate change programming. She helps to advance and coordinate also external professional development and training opportunities, and really builds these partnerships with all of you across the country, and has been doing excellent work in climate pedagogy refinement and professional development and training. So thank you so much for joining us, Michèle, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for that nice introduction. And I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully that's working. You seeing that okay? Good. Wonderful. Okay, so I have a few slides I wanted to share with you. And this first one, and first of all, I just wanted to thank Myeengun as well for those words and that reminder that the work, like the joyful work of connecting to the land and to the younger generation is so aligned with this work that we need to do on climate education and to get outside and enjoy the moon and enjoy the land. So thank you for that. In this first slide here, Sarah already spoke to this, but this is the National Adaptation Strategy she was talking about, and there's the little target that's mentioned in there. By 2027, 70% of the members of relevant professional associations will have the skills to be able to apply a climate lens to their work and to decision making. So no time to waste if we're going to meet that target. And so we're really grateful to Natural Resources Canada for the call for proposals that ask for different ideas for training. And we propose to focus the training on the next generation and students and professors that are working in universities and colleges across the country. Oh dear, something else is popping up that I don't want. Okay, there we go. So just a little bit about the project. It's got 3 project components. The first one is a national needs assessment, and we presented that last year when we had the forum in April. The second component is focused on us trying to walk the talk here at University of Waterloo and undertake curriculum revisions in collaboration with the departments that we're working with. So we've got a couple of departments in engineering. We've got the School of Architecture, the School of Planning, the School of Accounting and Finance, and Systems Design Engineering is also part of the project. So we've been working with them on that. And the third component of the project is focused on national communities of practice, supporting existing communities or, developing new ones if needed. And we started the project in April 2024, and it's going to wrap up at the end of December. So before the end of December, we're going to have another national forum to share some of what happened. That QR code there with the little dinosaur in it will take you to our project website if you want to learn more about the project. And just a shout out also to our advisory group members who are listed on the right there, the CPA Canada, the Canadian Institute of Planners, the Canadian Architectural Certification Board, CSLA is the Canadian Society for Landscape Architects, and then Engineers Canada. And I know a lot of them are probably in the room here today. They help guide us on, making sure that this project is aligned with some of the work that they're doing as well. And so I just wanted to let you know a little bit, give you a quick update on what's happening with the project and maybe a little refresher on what we shared last year in the survey that we did and published in April. And that QR code here will take you to the survey report, which you can access in English and in French. We did a survey of universities and colleges across Canada that are offering these target programs. And so here, just briefly, when we tried to figure out which ones were integrating climate change more into the curriculum, for sure, our architecture schools were much more on this. They've been doing it for a while, focusing a lot on climate mitigation, maybe more than adaptation. And then quite a lot of planning schools, 50% of the planning schools were integrating it. And by integrating, we mean that, they've included in their program outcomes, and maybe they have some required courses that address climate change as well that are part of the curriculum. Civil and environmental engineering, not so much, programs across Canada, and then systems and other kinds of engineering like systems and sustainability engineering. It wasn't quite on the radar yet. And accounting schools, we actually had a pretty low response. So, but not many accounting schools were really taking this up, although an increasing number of them are addressing sustainability more generally. And also we had a look at climate adaptation, the degree to which universities and colleges are integrating climate adaptation into their courses. And quite a lot of elective courses touch on it. Not so many specialized courses required, a whole course on it, but definitely quite a lot of schools have integrated it, especially in architecture and in planning, have incorporated aspects of climate adaptation into some of their courses, whether they're elected or required. So it's definitely happening. It's kind of at the beginning, let's say. Skipping ahead to a later part of the survey where we asked people what kind of supports they needed to integrate climate into the curriculum. And across all disciplines, the top 3 supports were support for developing and redesigning courses, accessing relevant teaching and learning resources and tools, and also professional development for faculty members. We also asked them about enabling factors, and these are good to keep an eye on. So what kind of conditions make it easier to do this work? And across all the disciplines, so this is the black box on the right, definitely having faculty members in the university or college or in the department that have some at least interest and preferably expertise really makes it much, much easier. And that makes sense to integrate climate in the curriculum if you've got the people there that are interested in doing it and have the skills to do it. Also, having climate change be named as a priority in the university or college strategic plan is really important. And on Wednesday in our session on planning, I know UNBC is going to be speaking to that a little bit because the approach of that university has been really helpful for them. And also, not to be discounted is the student enthusiasm and interest. So a lot of students are asking for this work. So that definitely makes it easier for people to do if there's an appetite among students and they're asking for this kind of education. We've been doing some parallel work on working with the 3 post-secondary institutions here in Waterloo region. and finding, basically, we did a survey. We interviewed a number of professors and who are already trying to incorporate climate change into their curriculum, and they really spoke to a tension between, on a personal level, feeling like you've got the skills, the teaching and learning strategies in terms of climate pedagogy or the way to teach it. You know how to deal with climate emotions of students because it can be a very heavy topic. So how do you balance hope and agency with like a sense that we're in a crisis as well? And the need for community building. But so there's the personal work that needs to be done, but at the same time, a real recognition that there's a need for institutional change as well, more systemic change where, the university is creating that supportive environment, not just for climate change education, but also for people to connect and collaborate across disciplines, because, many institutions have these silos and it's quite hard to make it happen. Even just offering a course that's open to students from different disciplines, there can be a lot of obstacles to make that sort of thing happen. So these are all things that we need to work on. Just going back to the survey briefly that we did under the ACE project, we did create some infographics to try to share the key findings for each of the disciplines and overall. And those are all available on our website now. And we hope that you use them. We put them into slide shape and slide dimensions so that if people need to use them to, say, do presentations to other faculty members or whatever to help make the case for it, this is a resource that's available for you. So that was component one of the project, the survey. And component B focuses on the curriculum revisions at University of Waterloo. So those are the departments we're working with. And we have 5 disciplinary sessions planned, as Sarah mentioned, over the course of the next 3 days. And some of our folks are going to be in those sessions, and you'll have a chance to talk to them. Some of them will be presenting about the work that they've been doing with other faculty members and with students as well. This image on the right is an example from the School of Architecture that has been, they created a architecture curriculum wall for climate in the curriculum. And had, as you can see, there's a lot there because they had a lot of input from students, from faculty members to see about where climate connects to the existing courses that are already being offered there. So each of the departments is doing things in their own way in line with the curriculum renewal cycle that each of them are in, and people that are interested in the faculty. And a lot of them have hired grad students to help them do the work as well, and co-op students in some cases. So there's lots of interesting things going on. Some of them are introducing new courses, or in other cases, developing teaching and learning resources or modules. So there's each of the departments is kind of tackling things in their own way. Even hiring new faculty members that have like a solid interest and skills in climate adaptation has been a strategy too. And then finally, for component C, which is focused on supporting communities of practice, the focus here is on sharing strategies and resources to speed up the integration of climate education, especially climate adaptation education. Integration into the curriculum and fostering dialogue across disciplines as well. So we've, over the last year mostly, we've been doing a number of things to try to build opportunities. Definitely this forum and the last one, that's like a big part of this, creating a space where people can talk to each other and share. But we also have the project website. We've started a little e-newsletter that goes out twice per semester. You can sign up for that on the project website for the mailing list for that. We've done a couple of webinars. We held 2 in the fall to just share resources. One of them was featured ICLEI Canada. They have an amazing website, climateinsight.ca. So they walked us through that and how professors and instructors could use that as a teaching resource. We've also set up a LinkedIn group. We've got 133 members so far, and so that QR code will take you to that. But kind of related to that, and we're going to hear a little bit later from Stephanie Gagnon of the Climate Risk Institute, they have set up a platform called Can Adapt, and we have set up a group in there. So it's a space for post-secondary instructors to talk to each other, and that should go a little further than the LinkedIn group does. So we've just launched that just a couple of weeks ago. And a lot of our faculty members are doing presentations and workshops at conferences to get people to talk to each other as well. So these are various methods we've tried, but we definitely welcome ideas from others. If you have an idea for a webinar or you want to contribute to our newsletter, this project is really about showcasing work that's being done by many different universities and colleges. It's not just about tooting University of Waterloo's horn. We want to work together with people. And just another note too, in terms of the community of practice, we've just released these climate change curriculum briefs. So these are just starting points to spark dialogue, like a catalyst for working on the curriculum. You can find these on our website, on the project website. And we've got them for these 4 disciplines. Right now, they're just in English, but we're working on making those available in French as well. And in these actually, they include some ideas for learning outcomes and how climate action relates to the outcomes and competencies that you need to be teaching in these different target disciplines that we're working on under the project. And to that note, I just wanted to do a shout out to the Climate Action Competency Framework as well, that the Resilience by Design Lab at Royal Roads University has come up with. I won't say any more about it because Robin Cox is our next speaker and she's going to speak to it. But this has been a really a good resource for our project when we're thinking about what do we need to integrate in the curriculum? What do we want students to learn anyway? So we've used this as a starting point. And I know that at the Climate Risk Institute, they've been working with professionals in these different disciplines and also using this same framework as a guideline to be thinking about professional development and training. So luckily, we've got both Robin and Stephanie here who will speak to how they're using this resource for competencies. And I think that's it from me. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Michèle. That was great. It's good to see all of those results come together, and there's lots of things I'd like to pick up in our Q&A, so I really appreciate that. I think you're still sharing your screen. However.
Oh, am I? Okay, sorry.
Okay, take your time. In the meantime, we will move on to Robin Cox. I'd like to introduce Dr. Robin Cox, who is a professor at Royal Roads University and director of the Resilience by Design Lab. Dr. Cox has over 25 years of experience working in the intersecting fields of disaster and emergency management and climate action. As director of the RBD Lab, Robin works with an interdisciplinary and multi-sectoral team to build regional, national, and international climate adaptation research and capacity building projects like the Climate Action Competency Framework and the Resilience by Design Climate Game. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cox. I really appreciate that. We've been using ways to integrate the Climate Action Competency Framework into the ACE project for quite some time now, so it's great to have you here to talk about it and other resources that you've been working on. So I'll pass it over to you and you can share your screen.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Michèle and Sarah and Henry, for your warm welcome and your introduction and the overview of the context of this forum. And featuring some of the great work that Waterloo is doing in leading this integration of climate change into professional education. I also want to just directly thank you, Henry, for your reminder that moving climate-informed education forward is part of our shared commitment to this planet, part of our shared responsibility to the many species that we share this planet with in, as you said, this era of the eighth fire. I want to begin by naming something that's likely true for most of us here in this space, not just those of us speaking, but all of you who've joined, that we already recognize the importance of climate-ready education. We see the growing gap between the world our education systems are largely designed for and the world our students are actually entering. And many of us as educators, as practitioners, as curriculum designers and institutional leaders are actively trying to work and fill that gap. So I just want to frame that as, and this forum generally as part of a much broader community of people who are collectively working at the edge of climate and education together, experimenting often, learning a lot, and often pushing against real constraints to make climate education more meaningful and more integrated and more impactful, or even for it to exist in some cases. Michèle, you've already spoken to the context of the work, this call to have 70% of relevant professions in Canada have the capacity to apply the knowledge and skills associated with climate action. It's not a new call. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change also was clear that education is a critical agent of climate action. Countries are explicitly called on to ensure climate education, to ensure public awareness and meaningful participation. But despite that, the gap between those expectations and educational practice remains significant. So despite some important accomplishments, some of which both you, Sarah, and Michèle highlighted, as recently as 2021, a major review found that roughly half of national education policy documents did not mention climate change at all. A more recent analysis, and I think it came out in 2025, that some of them here at Waterloo and other institutions like the one I work at Royal Roads University are making some inroads, but nearly half of national curricula globally still make no reference to climate change. In the K-12 space, teachers report feeling a lack of confidence about teaching climate change. So it's not because they don't care, and it's not because they don't see it as a priority, but they lack time and training and institutional support to integrate climate in the K-12 space, which is not the space we're talking about, but it is the precursor to the space we're talking about. And I would say in higher education, we see a parallel pattern. While some universities, as I said, Waterloo and Royal Roads and many others, UBC, McGill, are making some inroads and have some programs or integrating climate into some programs. And some of those key ones that Michèle, you mentioned, planning, engineering, landscape, architecture. Many of you are from those professions here at this forum. And in those professions, climate is really being considered. It's reshaping standards, it's reshaping risk frameworks and everyday decision making. And it makes sense that those professions are often the first to articulate climate-related competencies because they're on the front line of climate change and climate impacts. So,
Robin, I'm sorry to interrupt your flow. I want to be sure that are you sharing slides? It might just be on my
no.
end. I'm not seeing. Okay, good. Continue. My apologies for interrupting you. I wanted to be sure you didn't think you were sharing slides.
No, not sharing slides. I will share a couple of websites as long as that works.
Okay, this is great, as you were.
Yeah, no, so basically, the curriculum transformation that we're all invested in, that we're talking about at this forum, continues to lag. And the scale and pace of that change needs to accelerate if it's going to catch up with climate change and the scale and pace of climate disruptions, and the scale and pace of our continued contributions to climate change. And that does require, as Michèle mentioned, moving beyond electives and disciplinary silos to a more comprehensive integration of climate change in our professions, across professions and curricula. All sectors are going to be affected. All organizations will experience disruption from climate change, already are, and all workers, regardless of their role, will be impacted and implicated in climate action, impacted by climate change and implicated in climate action, whether that's a frontline role or behind the scenes in a smaller sort of secondary role, but still as important. So the shift we are collectively grappling with, I would say, is that climate change can no longer be a specialized issue. It needs to be a shared condition of professional life. We need to understand that this shift is fundamentally changing what education is for. It's not the only factor that is doing that, but it is an important and critical factor. So this is where the idea of, and Michèle already mentioned the Climate Action Competency Framework, but it's really where the idea of competency-informed climate education becomes especially important. And so I want to speak a little bit to the competency framework and another tool that we've been working on at the Resilience by Design Lab. So let me just try and bring this up. So the Climate Action Competency Framework V2, as we call it, because it's the second version. The first version was focused only on adaptation, and this version focuses on adaptation and mitigation. Low carbon resilience, or climate action, is what I would call it. And it's a profession agnostic framework that treats climate competencies and competence as something that's going to develop over time. That really requires a shift in mindset, a shift in professional cultures that looks across different roles and professions. This idea of, a comprehensive cross-sector integration of climate competencies. And that it depends, and this harkens back perhaps to what Henry was talking about, that it depends not just on technical knowledge, but it really relies on systems thinking, collaboration, shift in our ethics and our ethical and moral stance. It focuses on implementation and leadership. And so we've, with the competency framework, tried to frame these out in 6 large domains of competence, which you'll see here in this little flower. And this is an interactive tool. We've had support from the Climate Risk Institute to turn it into a bilingual tool, so you will see both English and French. And you can explore the Competency Explorer. I'll try it now, but it is, I will say, a bit slow right now on my computer. But this will lead you into a more detailed look at the competencies that exist, or that we argue exist and need to exist in climate competencies. In this one, the working together domain, we frame as the first domain that applies to all. And in many cases, people will say, oh yes, we already do that in our profession. We already talk about working together, which is fantastic. We've tried to really frame this as working together in the climate context. So the emphasis on cross-sector, cross-disciplinary collaboration, the emphasis on fostering partnerships and really understanding and developing those partnerships and broad engagement. Anyway, each of these domains will have competency areas and competence across a spectrum. And rather than talk about we'll talk a little bit about this, but these are really levels of complexity. They're not necessarily one better than the other, but React Follow is really describing an early competency, say around collaboration, so working effectively with others. Act Apply deepens that to say, well, you beyond working together, you also need to facilitate that cooperation, anticipate and initiate. You might be thinking about building and maintaining those relationships, and leading and strategizing, maybe developing the policies and practices that inform that. So the CACF is now being used to help professions consider what climate-related competencies are relevant to their work. And, as we've already heard, we'll hear more about that in the panel. But the idea here is a shift that many of you are already working towards, or at least thinking about, which is a shift from teaching climate change as content to cultivating climate-informed professional capabilities, the ability to act. I'm going to share another tool that we've worked on. This one isn't quite so, I'll just go back to the competency framework for a second. For any of you that are interested in exploring it, we also have a self-assessment tool. It's an interactive tool that will allow you to assess where you are on your own in terms of developing competence and in relationship to other professionals. So another tool that we've been working on, as part of a project with the Climate Action Secretariat here in BC, really speaks to this issue that if we're serious about climate-ready workforces across sectors, we also need informal, experiential, and social learning spaces that allow people to practice working with complexity, uncertainty, and trade-offs, and to do so in a risk-free or a low-risk environment. And so we have been focusing on what we've called the climate resilience. You can just see a sort of slightly fuzzy picture of it. The resilience by design game. It's a serious game, an example of a tool of informal learning. The game places participants in realistic climate impacted scenarios that are locally specific. So they generate the scenarios. And these are scenarios with no perfect answers, so it just involves them in competing priorities, constraints. The idea is to slow decision-making down, to look at what is locally specific and relevant to the hazards and risks a community or a region faces, to support dialogue across those roles and learn from each other, and to make decisions in that setting. So importantly, it works in professional development contexts, but also, and classrooms, but not one or the other. So I'm sharing those two tools because they point to the same reality, that meeting the climate challenge will require learning that extends beyond formal curriculum into creative, relational, and practice-based spaces in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So that brings us to the panel. The panelists you're going to hear from today, many of you in the audience, as I've said before, are actually working through these same questions. They're focusing on things of what competencies matter most and for whom. How do we generate and integrate climate ideas and concepts meaningfully across disciplines? What pedagogical approaches support agency and purpose and meaning rather than simply overwhelm, which is something that we know that we need to do? I'm going to stop sharing here, sorry. And what needs to shift institutionally for this work to take hold, because it's often an individual department, an individual program leading this work, but we need this to be institutionally important. So there's no single model. So what connects this work is not a single solution, but a shared concern, really, that one that we all presumably share, about how climate-ready education can actually happen in practice. So I'm just going to invite you to a couple of things and thoughts about how to listen to this conversation. So as each panelist speaks, you might think to yourself or ask yourself, how are they understanding and framing climate readiness within their disciplinary context or within their experience? What are some of the assumptions we are making about professional education, and how are those being challenged? Where do their approaches help learners see their role in climate action, whether those are students in formal programs or staff from a municipality wanting to take a dive in through the serious game or something else? And what would need to change structurally and in particular culturally for these ideas to implement at scale across education? So how are they framing climate readiness? What assumptions are about professional education are we entertaining or challenging? Where do these approaches help learners see their role, see their relevance to climate action? And what needs to change structurally or culturally for these ideas to scale? So with that, the plenary in this format is obviously one moment in a much larger effort to align education with the realities our students are inheriting and with the responsibilities they carry forward, that we carry forward as professionals. So I want to dive into the panel. I'm very pleased to be part of this panel and to the discussion it's going to facilitate. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll launch into the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. That was great. I really appreciate all of the backstory on the competency framework. And the questions you asked there at the end are really helpful for all of the participants to keep in mind all week. So as you're entering into the disciplinary sessions, those will, I think, be really important kind of filters to have, or questions you can ask as you discuss. And so we have one more speaker in our panel this morning, and then Robin, Myeengun, Stephanie, Michèle, and I will have a few minutes nearing the end there for discussion. So thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate that. Our last speaker this morning is Stephanie Gagnon, who is the president of the Climate Risk Institute. She's an accomplished business leader and award-winning professional planner dedicated to leading sustainability and climate initiatives. Her expertise lies in strategic leadership, sustainability and climate planning, collaboration and engagement, capacity building, and governance. Stephanie brings a wealth of experience from working with government, not-for-profits, universities, and the private sector, valuing interdisciplinary approaches and diversity in partnerships. So Stephanie will be speaking to some of the work being done by the Climate Risk Institute to better understand the need for climate competencies out there in the workforce. So Stephanie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and you're free to share your own slides as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today. Just gonna move a few things around on my screen. Thanks for having us today. I will build upon a lot of the conversation that we have started already, and particularly a lot of the similar messaging that both Michèle and Robin shared. I have the pleasure of being able to share some of the learnings that we have developed from the skills and development assessment from professionals. So the Climate Risk Institute, with partners, including Railroads University, with Robin and South Arm Training Development, have been working on a Professionals Advancing Adaptation Competencies piece of work. And so I just wanted to share more high level learnings at this stage from that piece of work in terms of the professional setting and what professionals are looking at in terms of what's needed for climate competency, particularly around adaptation, where professionals are at in terms of their own confidence in those skills and really appreciation for what's needed going forward. And the tie back then into, for post-secondary education, what's really needed going forward at the light touch level. Now, I don't want to get into too much of the details because many of my colleagues are very much involved in all of these projects. And so you will hear in the subsequent sessions throughout the week, we have some folks who are participating with us in accounting. Irene will be involved. We have some of our landscape architects folks who are participating. And of course, all of the professional associations at the national level are very involved in all of this work. And so very happy for them to get into the details of their lessons learned and the things that are most important for them. But I'm going to share a few things that are the most important. I do want to make sure that my screen is sharing because it seems to have not indicated. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about any particular discipline, but I'm going to talk about what existing professionals are really telling us that they need to be successful in this world of changing climate and therefore changing business context going forward. And so let me just quickly talk about a lot of the things that have been said already. So the Professionals Advancing Adaptation Competencies work is also very generously funded by the Natural Resources Canada program, Climate Change Adaptation. Very much appreciate all their support. And directly aligned with the same targets that were shared earlier today. And so super important for us to talk about the fact that by 2027, that's next year, 70% of our professionals across Canada, and particularly in a few disciplines that were identified, are really intended to be able to apply climate adaptation knowledge, which I think is important. It's not just know it, it's not just understand the context of it, but it is take that knowledge and apply it to their day-to-day business, their day-to-day professional duties. And so that's something that's really important that's driving a lot of this conversation. Now, what have we been looking at? We're not looking at all the different disciplines across all the professional sectors in Canada, but we are looking at a subset of them. So in particular, looking at accounting and engineering, landscape architecture, and planning, which is very much aligned with the work that's happening in this project. Again, just to give you a sense of things, the work that's underway with the information I'm going to share from this today is really about a very broad group of people coming together. And as Robin talked about, like innovating, learning, testing out these ideas. And I think that's really important to understand is that we're bringing in all of those different disciplines to understand what's the most important, both for the specific 4 disciplines, but there's a lot of learnings that are coming out of that are cross-discipline. And it's important to recognize that. So I won't list them all, but just be aware that there are people being drawn in to these insights from all across these sectors, and including the subcommittees, which are groups of somewhere between upwards of 10 to 15 people who are participating from each of the professional sectors. So the accounting, the landscape architects, the engineers, and the planners. Just to top things off as we get into it, I think one of the things that's the most important piece that has come through in my learnings, at least in working in this project, is that climate adaptation and climate action more broadly, and I appreciate Robin recognizing that. Some of this work started off on adaptation, but low carbon resilience is fundamental to adaptation work. And so more broadly, climate action. One, it's already expected in a lot of the professions. We don't necessarily feel totally confident yet in how we address that, but it is embedded in how we do this. And what we're seeing come through in the work that's really progressed is that it's not just it is a mindset, but it's also very much embedded in many of the professions have professional responsibilities through codes of conduct, through public interest obligations. And so it is there. It may not be as explicit yet as it may need to be going forward, but it is very much explicit in what is required for the professional setting. So I will refer just briefly to the Climate Action Competency Framework. Robin, you've been through it. I'm going to highlight a couple more things just to remind folks, because it's such an integral piece of work in terms of the professions looking at their competency areas. And so I encourage you, one, to go into the tool. It's excellent. The interactive nature of it, particularly through the self-assessment, is really interesting. And certainly we're always open to feedback on that. At least I am in this project, and I'm sure Robin would be in the work that she's doing in building it out. So I think one of the things that's really important to recognize is that there are 6 pillars, and I want to just focus on that because what we learned from the professionals is that those 6 pillars show up differently in the professions today. And so the working together piece, the leadership, capacity building, and affecting change are just as important. They're foundational to the work. And then there's also solution design and climate risk assessment, which are a little bit more, I would say, technical in nature. But as I'm just going to talk about here, no one is more important than the other.
Pardon my
Sorry, Sarah, go
interruption.
ahead.
No, no, thank you. Very, very observant. Could you just slow down a tiny little bit for our
Yeah,
interpreters? Thank you. I appreciate that.
absolutely. Sure. Okay, so, oh, that's funny. My screen showed up. That's not showing everything. So, this is what it's supposed to represent, is that we actually did a survey of professionals across these 4 different disciplines. And we've got 130 participants, not showing up in the slide, that's fine. 130 participants who shared their comfort level with each of these competencies. So really looking at the Climate Action Competency Framework, and included quite a range. So accountants at 17%, engineers at 30%, planners and the landscape architects largely at the remaining amounts. So quite a wide diversity of folks. And one of the things that significantly came through is that there is a very strong recognition that climate change is highly relevant to their professions. So one, I think that's important to take a moment just to think about the relevance of that, is that we get it. We understand that climate change is already significantly impacting the work that we need to do and the work that we will need to do going forward. The interesting thing happens when we get into the details around their levels of comfort with this. Now, this is a big chart. I don't need you to look at all of it. But what I do want to just highlight is that in each of the 6 different areas of competency, there is a moderate level of confidence across the board, certainly higher in the green box in that working together competency. Now, one thing I will also sort of emphasize from what Robin talked about is that I think there's a real recognition across the professions that working together are base skills for all of the professions. The question is, do we do it? Are we as proficient in it as we need to be when it comes to climate working together? Climate facilitation, collaboration, conflict management. So that, I think, is a question yet to still be uncovered and pulled apart, that onion that needs to be unlayered. The other area that I do want to highlight is that, for example, in this climate risk competency, we actually see a fairly low level of comfort with our skills as professionals in these sectors. And so there are also some very technical skills that definitely need some additional understanding. And you see that in some of the areas as well. You'll see it, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but climate-related finance across the board, whether that be in the accounting discipline or in the landscape architecture discipline, it's something that we're not as confident in. Not every one of those disciplines will necessarily need to have a high level of proficiency, but I still think that what we're uncovering is that there's a lack of understanding the implications of some of these competencies. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit just about the high level insight. So again, I'm not going to get into each of the disciplines. I just want to talk about what's becoming illuminated, big picture. So big picture, it's really that professions are not just asking for climate specialists. It is expected of professionals in every one of these disciplines and from graduates coming out, because graduates are definitely stepping into a world where they need to understand climate adaptation, climate change, really from day one. They're not saying that every graduate has to be a climate expert. Now, don't get me wrong, there are pathways to climate expertise in each one of these disciplines, and the levels of expectation for knowledge and ability to apply those skills is higher for the climate experts. But for the profession as a whole, it's really important that every graduate must be able to operate responsibly in a world that's highly impacted by climate change, and then also know when to bring others in. And that's probably one of the biggest pieces. The other one is that it's already expected. So this isn't something new, and I think the other folks have talked about this. You know, business practices, professionals are already addressing the types of risks that are being faced by climate changes. It's expected, as I talked about, in terms of professional ethics and code of conducts. But right now, a lot of what's in the professional arena is that it's expected implicitly, or it's very fragmented through different types of guidelines or standards here, but not across the whole. And so really important to understand that there is work to be done around making it explicit. The other piece is that the competencies aren't necessarily technical in nature. There are some technical areas where we need additional understanding of how to do the work, like I talked about with climate-related finance, also just generally understanding GHGs and how they factor into low carbon resilience. But bigger picture, they really are more strategic, financial, and integrative types of competencies that are fundamental to how new graduates step into the workforce. So new graduates will be expected to participate in and interpret strategy. They'll be really have to understand what financial decisions, how they intersect with things like design and building in cities, or they might then interact with materiality when it comes to finance. And so understanding that there are significant aspects of this work that are about bringing it all together and looking at those trade-offs and really understanding how do you prioritize and make decisions ultimately at the end of the day. The last one is that collaboration is a core skill, and maybe that's a little bit my own bias. I was thinking my bio is very heavily on collaboration, but that's because I come from a background as a professional planner, but from the perspective of being somebody who really focuses on municipalities as a whole. And so it takes all disciplines to be able to work in that space. And so really have your mindset on interdisciplinary practices is so important. Now, that's not to say that you still need to know everything about climate adaptation, but you need to know two things to do collaboration well in this space. In what we're learning is that one, you need to have enough understanding and ability to apply the implications of climate change in your work to be able to engage in an interdisciplinary conversation, but you also need to know when to engage others. So when to bring in those specialists who have the depth of experience in their own areas that we would not be able to do as maybe a generalist, say if you're a generalist practitioner in, say, the engineering field or the landscape architecture field. So being really clear about how to engage well is really important. The last piece that I'll just talk about here is that there are some very particular gaps, and the gaps are really around some level of climate information and understanding how climate intersects with some of these disciplines, and particularly around risk and risk assessment. The other piece is, as Robin talked about as well, that's systems thinking and understanding how risk management works generally, particularly in the adaptation space. Risk management understanding is really important. So having that broader mindset is critical. Understanding financial and policy implications, because at the end of the day, most professionals, where the real change impacts is around how do you make decisions differently? How do we make and prioritize decisions where you have many factors? All of the different professional disciplines and practitioners have to make decisions in a very complex environment. It includes all kinds of factors that are high priorities. They can be economic, environmental, social, cultural, you name it. And you have to be able to build those together. But you have to be able to understand the cross-cutting nature of climate impacts across all of those things to be able to do it well. Because at the end of the day, implementation and evaluation is one of the areas that we struggle the most as professionals to feel that we're doing it effectively. And then, as I've talked about already, certainly collaboration being one of the biggest ones. And so in terms of this work that we're doing, there's such strong alignment in the work that's happening, both in the professions, thinking about where they need to go and what skills they need to build more strongly and what training then is needed to support that work. And of course, the post-secondary work as well. That, you know, from my perspective, it isn't just about learning the technical, the content components of it. It is really about putting ourselves in, you know, shared case studies, in practice examples to say, okay, here's a really mucky, difficult circumstance. How do you actually take the information that you understand, make sure that you're not missing voices, make sure that you're making sure that all of the specializations bring together that information, and then how do you chart a path to implementation that actually results in different changes, different decisions on the ground? And so from my perspective and from what we're learning through the work is that it is important that we build competencies both at this post-secondary and the professional level that are in alignment with each other. And then even more importantly, it's really important that going back to that first statement from the National Adaptation Strategy, that's all about being able to apply these skills rather than just know them. That's the piece of the puzzle that I think is the biggest gap, is that we're going from a stage where we understand, to we know how to move forward. And that feels much more comfortable. And we can then continue to test and edge those boundaries in terms of making better decisions and better decisions moving forward. So I'll stop at that and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate that. So many themes coming up across all of the presentations that I think we can spend some time digging into in our last 15 minutes or so. So if you want to stop sharing, Stephanie, and then
Yeah.
our team will spotlight the panel. Just give us a minute to get ourselves settled, and then we'll begin our discussion.
Sarah, did it come down? Because I'm having trouble seeing it do that.
Not just yet on my end, but oh, now it is. I think maybe there's a lag between what I'm seeing on my
There
spot.
must be, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and then we just need all of the panelists in front of us rather than one screen. That would be great. So while that's happening, maybe I'll just pull on a couple of threads that I heard that resonated with me, and perhaps we'll come back to them at the end. But in common to all the speakers, I heard this sort of plea for or focus on how important it is to work together, to build skills of collaboration, not just the sort of technical capacities, but that working together across disciplines is so central. I also heard that it's very important to apply this knowledge. It's not just, again, it's not sufficient to just sort of impart these skills and move on, but it's how do they come into practice in these different disciplines? How do we make them real? And that many of these competencies are already expected and present but in varying sort of depth. And certainly it varies across different disciplines. So I think there's some consistency there, which to me highlighted an issue I heard a couple of you mention, that this tension between the individual changes, whether that's pedagogies or courses or initiatives, and then the collective systemic change in universities and professional associations and government and in civil society organizations. So that first individual effort is just quite different from the broader project of systemic change. So the first question, there's lots more that you said, but those are a couple of things that stuck with me. There's a question in the Q&A, and I encourage the other folks listening and watching, if you have any questions for our panelists that I can bring forward for you, please put those in the Q&A. I'll let the whole panel react a bit to the first question, which I'm going to paraphrase, but there are so many interesting, important things going on in this space when it comes to assessing competencies and developing new pedagogies and doing a better job, sort of broadly speaking, of climate education, both adaptation and mitigation. But it would seem that we need to, move faster, scale up, accelerate our progress, and learn from what we've gathered. So I just wonder if any of you have reflections on how we might, like, what are those levers of change that might help us to accelerate progress a bit? Maybe, Michèle, do you want to speak quickly since you were, and we'll keep our answers a little brief if possible so we can get to a couple of questions.
Sure. Sorry, which question do you want me to focus on? Can you repeat it?
What are the levers of change that we might find to accelerate progress, given all these great examples we have and good toolkits and, how can we move a little faster?
I mean, I think one of the strategies of the ACE project is to encourage people to share because if and starting first within disciplines, at least so engineering schools, maybe civil engineering schools could talk to each other a little bit about what strategies that they've been using, and share curriculum if possible. Like if one school has already developed a course that's figured out how to incorporate climate, adaptation competencies to be able to share that with other people so they don't have to start from scratch. So that would be one way of sharing, like within the disciplines, just sharing curriculum. And actually, we hope maybe that we can use that Can Adapt platform for some of that. If people, not everybody wants to share, but that might be one way of just speeding things up, doing it that way. But I'll let the other panelists share some of their ideas.
Thanks, Michèle. Robin, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I totally agree with that, Michèle, and in part it responds to that first question, which included a question about regulators and standards. And I think some of the other levers that we need to be working on, I mean, as an educator, maybe it's not my job to create standards, but I think it is as researchers and as advocates for this work, is that until the regulations and standards change for professions and for other things like building codes, not only is there little incentive, there's sometimes a disincentive because people are responding to those. And if they are working towards a particular standard or regulation that doesn't require any consideration of climate, that's what they're going to work to. And that's one of the barriers that I think we face. The other one, as I would say, the sharing and collaboration, even though they are talked about a lot in post-secondary education within institutions and to some degree across institutions, it's still very proprietary. And it in some ways speaks to, there was a question in the chat talking about, is the shift also needing to involve a shift in sort of our economic models? I'm totally paraphrasing, but I think there are larger shifts that are also required that we as educators and trainers and people also have to have a vested interest in pushing forward. That as long as profit is your motivation, as long as short-term thinking is your motivation, which it generally is for boards and for shareholders, we're not going to get the changes that we need across disciplines, across sectors, across professions.
Thanks, Robin. I appreciate that. Stephanie, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the space of needing to move much more quickly, I mean, I look at that target and think 2027 and 70%. So in the planning profession, Michèle, you talked about some of your survey work, and I happen to know the planning profession because I'm leading that part of the work that we're doing in the greater detail. But so somewhere around in the range of 40% of planners feel relatively confident around climate adaptation based on one of the latest surveys. The work that we did showed them a little bit higher than that, but that's significantly lower than a 70% feeling comfortable applying it. I don't think that's dissimilar across many of the different disciplines, certainly in the work that we've done, but just knowing people that I know in a wide variety of fields who very much understand that climate is significant and should be impacting it, but they don't know what to do with that. And so upskilling is critical. I think that there is a significant place for professionals to do a lot more advocacy around saying, like, look, particularly when I'm thinking about climate adaptation, we are, at the end of the day, this is about embedding this in good risk management. organizations, whether you're corporate and you're thinking about, board responsibilities or reporting on a regular basis, or if you're in the public sector, you are constantly having to think about how do you make sure that we are managing risk appropriately. And climate change is one of our biggest risks internationally in the world. You look at the Economic Forum results, and we're talking about the third highest level of like anticipated risk for this coming year behind geopolitical tensions. And so it's already there, and many professions are having to do with it. So we need a lot more advocacy from the professionals who are saying this is critical to our business function, whether that be public or private business. And so we need the skills to do it better. And then that directly ties into what Robin just said around regulators. I do think that making sure that the regulatory bodies for each of these professional practices provides a base level of expectation across this type of work, because of course you can go beyond that. Frankly, as someone who's worked in innovation for most of my career, sometimes those base level regulations can be a hindrance to new innovation, but it sets the baseline of a minimum expectation. And we absolutely need that, both so that the post-secondary organizations can make sure that curriculum is designed to it, but also professionals can make sure that they're truly have some understanding of what their liability is, because liability doesn't go away just because that regulation isn't, or that regulatory body isn't set. It's still there, but it provides us with an understanding of what we need to do to get to that level.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And we have a couple of questions here that hover around the same issues that I want to throw at you in our remaining minutes. We have a question in the chat and also one in the Q&A just about sort of the broader audiences for this kind of capacity building and training work. That, I mean, admittedly, this project, the ACE project, was focused on training in the professional disciplines of professional accountants and engineers and architects, etc. But I love the framing of one person who said, in the context of a side hustle, or like, new work that you're adding on to your own profession, or something that's sort of, just unfamiliar or new territory for you. And some of the trades being so central to progressing on sustainable building technologies and energy systems, and really the core of our kind of the resilience of our critical infrastructure, for instance. How do we reach beyond this sort of first most obvious set of disciplines and practitioners to engage with to other sectors and other learners? And Michèle, maybe you could speak first. I know you do a lot of work with high schools and all kinds of community groups. So I wonder if you could speak to that briefly.
Sure. And I also just wanted to say that for the forum, I think about 350 or so people have registered, and close to half of them are not from the disciplines that we're targeting. We have lots of people joining who are sustainability, or like maybe just don't identify under those disciplines. So already this forum, I think, is going to be a good space to widen the conversations to some of those other disciplines. But in terms of other audiences, yeah, for sure. And Robin, you spoke to that, like providing support for teachers to be able to feel more comfortable. And somebody mentioned that in the chat, like what would be great is if we knew that high school students were starting their post-secondary adventures with a solid sense of like agency and hope and some decent climate literacy, so that we didn't have to do that work. But right now we can't really assume that. So we have to do that, in the first couple of years of university, basically. And then just in terms of thinking about these other audiences as well, like it's so right, we have our students in post-secondary that is one audience, but then we have to make sure the instructors are feeling comfortable with this work. And then there's such a close relationship with the professionals that Stephanie's talking about, and the work that needs to be done, like the resources that are being developed, maybe that are for professional training, professional development are great resources for teaching and learning that professors could be using. And so that's another way to speed things up and like think about these different audiences and some of the resources that are there to get everybody up to speed.
Thanks,
Can
Michèle.
I jump in? Because I absolutely agree for sure, high school. I think also, I mean, some of the trades are already thinking about this because they have to, and especially on the mitigation side, the emissions reduction side. I think the shift within education is also this broader shift. And how does that happen? So for one, I think acknowledging a broad range of work that is climate work. It may not be seen as that, and in some ways it's really in some ways not important, but making those links. So, grocery stores and thinking about food sustainability and plastics and stuff is associated with climate change. Thinking in the service, Royal Roads has a hospitality and tourism degree. That's training, okay, professionals or management level, but I think within hospitality and tourism, having knowledge to share with guides being able to talk about climate change. This is a culture shift, and we are in Canada and in North America and largely in the world are needing to make that culture shift. We are not there. Most people do not think about climate change other than to think, oh, that's bad, or there's a wildfire and that's climate change if they make that association. So I think acknowledging a broader range of work, and I think as students or as professionals, having the expectation in your professional development, like if it's not being offered, why is it not being offered? As students advocating, and they already are in programs, whether they're professional programs, undergraduate programs, high school classes, asking why, hey, we're facing a climate crisis. Why is this not being addressed? Because I think that fundamental culture shift will help manifest this across professions and sectors, regulators and standards, because that will be the push both locally and regionally and nationally and internationally, and the push to governments to make this. I mean, it's one thing to have it in the national adaptation strategy, but then the federal government and provincial governments and potentially even municipal governments have to then take that up and make that happen. They have to have those expectations built into policies if that's going to happen. And standards for teachers, standards for professions. So I think this is a broad culture shift we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a culture shift and an institutionalization and embedding so that it's sort of ubiquitous rather than, led by the passion of a couple individuals or, that kind of thing. Thanks,
It's
Robin.
moving beyond passion project to this larger undertaking that we all need to be engaged in.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. Stephanie, I'll give the last word to you. We're nearing time, so we just have a minute or two and then I'll wrap up. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly say that I think it really is about workforce upskilling across the board. And so the impacts of climate and how we address things going forward, no different than what I said before. I think this is just how you do business in the world today. And so we need the skills to be able to do that across all of the different, professions and choices that people make in terms of how they make a living and how they live in the world today. Not just about how we earn an income, but actually how we exist in the world. And so kind of taking it a little bit back to the opening statements around, the moon and connecting into the world today, is that this is so much connected into this is our world today. How do we live in it and how do we make good lives in it?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great way to pull all the threads together. So a couple of things that you've all left me with that I'll be mulling over for the rest of the week. I mean, I hear this sort of how broadly relevant these competencies are across disciplines, across life stages and seniority levels, across civil society, government, the private sector. Those competencies can't be sort of safeguarded or held within one particular or a subset of disciplines, right? There has to be this sort of broad dissemination and upskilling and deep skilling across them. So I think it's our job to help connect these competencies to the day-to-day work of folks, no matter what their path, which I think is really important. And of course, the call for sharing, which I totally appreciate given all of the work that you do on this panel. How do we share our tools, share our best practices, our cases, make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, but really kind of accelerating the uptake of tools that work. I always really appreciate that. And I also hear, we didn't get to one really excellent comment in the Q&A, but there is this broader need for or appetite for kind of a deeper transformational change, not, simply passing along technical skills that kind of reinforce the same patterns of vulnerability or inequality that we've locked ourselves into thus far, but actually challenging those, the underlying drivers of vulnerability, the underlying drivers of of high emissions as well in our communities. And this kind of pedagogical work can really contribute to that, asking big questions about what it means to have a resilient community and live a good life in that community. So that's part of the work we do. And collectively, what I really appreciate about our time together this week and last year and over the last many months is that many of these goals come together in building and deepening our community of practice. So we can share, we can ask bigger questions, we can learn from each other. So I'm really glad that this whole group has joined us to help deepen that community of practice. So I'd love to pass along my very brief thanks to Elder Myeengun Henry, who couldn't stay with us through the whole session, but was generous enough with his time at the beginning of our time together. Of course, to Robin, to Stephanie, to Michèle, and the whole Waterloo Climate Institute team at the back end who've been running and orchestrating this whole forum. And thank you all to our participants for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you, of course, in the rest of the sessions this week. The next one begins in just 30 minutes, and it's focused on climate pedagogy. What are the best ways that we can teach climate change in a post-secondary setting? So with that, we'll hopefully see you soon, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.